Nostradamus warned of the Great Divide, 2025 Prayer for Strength. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. Sun Tzu. What if Nostradamus's warnings weren't just visions of global disaster, but quiet signals pointing to the emotional and spiritual fractures we're living through right now? Because here in 2025, there's a tension that hums quietly beneath our everyday lives. It's not always loud, it doesn't come with sirens or headlines, but you can feel it in the strained silence between loved ones, in the rising pressure of simple conversations, and in the growing sense that we're no longer seeing the world through the same lens. This is the Great Divide. And perhaps, as Nostradamus saw it, it wasn't just a political or global rift, but a deeply personal one. A spiritual divide. A disconnect not just between people, but between people and their own sense of peace. At the Journey of Wisdom, we believe that in times like these, what we need most isn't more fear, but more stillness, more strength. That's where the second part of our journey begins, the prayer for strength. Now, this isn't a plea born from weakness. It is a conscious, deliberate act of fortitude. It is the decision to seek out our own center, our own quiet, unshakable ground when the world outside feels chaotic and uncertain. It's about finding the inner resilience needed not just to endure these times, but to navigate them with clarity and perhaps even with grace. The Great Divide is not a future event, it is our present reality. To truly understand this, we have to acknowledge that what we're experiencing feels fundamentally different from the disagreements of the past. I'm sure you remember a time when disagreement felt healthier. It was robust, certainly, and often passionate, but it felt like we were all, at the very least, standing on common ground, arguing about the best path forward. We could debate tax policy because we all agreed the budget report was the budget report. We could argue about foreign affairs because we shared a common understanding of the events that had occurred. The facts were the field we played on, the arguments were about the strategy. Now, it feels as if the ground itself has split beneath our feet. The disagreement is no longer just about opinions. It has become a profound disagreement on reality itself. We are no longer just arguing about the best way to solve a problem we all see. We are now locked in exhausting debates about whether the problem even exists at all. So, how did this happen? How did we arrive in a place where neighbors, and even family members, seem to be living in separate, parallel worlds? A large part of the answer lies in the very air we breathe, the digital atmosphere that surrounds us. We now live in personalized realities, inside what some have called filter bubbles or echo chambers. A simpler way to think of it is this: we each live in a digital house built just for us. The windows in this house are designed to show us only the parts of the world that confirm what we already believe. The walls are mirrors, reflecting our own views back to us, making them seem stronger, clearer, and more universally accepted than they actually are. The news that plays on the television inside this house is curated to please us, to anger us in familiar ways, and above all, to keep us watching. And when you spend enough time inside this house, it stops feeling like a house. It starts to feel like the entire world. So, when we encounter someone from a different house, someone whose windows show a completely different landscape, their reality seems not just different, but nonsensical, illogical, even willfully ignorant. And the gap between us widens. This isn't an abstract theory. It's a lived reality for millions. Think about the last big family holiday. Maybe it was Thanksgiving or the 4th of July. Remember that feeling? The warmth of reunion, the familiar smells from the kitchen, and underneath it all, that subtle tension, that tightrope walk of conversation, the mental checklist of forbidden subjects, topics to be navigated around like furniture in a dark room, lest you trip and shatter the fragile peace. That caution, that self-censorship born of a desire to preserve love, is one of the most poignant symptoms of the Great Divide. It's the quiet admission that the chasm has grown too wide to bridge with casual conversation. It's the heartbreak of knowing that on some fundamental level, you and someone you care for deeply no longer speak the same language of truth. And the result of all this is a profound sense of exhaustion. It's a kind of weariness that settles deep in the bones. It's the mental fatigue of having to constantly question every headline, every story. It's the emotional drain of navigating relationships that now feel conditional. It's the quiet burden of living with a constant, low-grade hum of social anxiety, wondering if a simple opinion might suddenly ignite a conflict. This isn't the productive stress of building something new. It's the corrosive stress of trying to keep what we have from falling apart. We talk about a divided nation, a polarized state, a fractured community, and all of that is true. But the deepest, most painful fault line of the Great Divide doesn't run along a border or a party line. It runs right down the middle of the dinner table in so many American homes. It separates parents from children, siblings from one another, and old friends who now look at each other with a sense of bewilderment, quietly wondering, how did we get here? Salon Prophet, 0. Understanding Nostradamus. Given this modern landscape of division and exhaustion, it's fair to ask, why would we turn to a 16th century mystic for insight? For many of us, the name Nostradamus conjures a specific image, perhaps a shadowy figure cloaked in mystery, poring over ancient texts, scribbling arcane predictions about distant disasters, fallen kings, and the end of days. It's an image that feels more like folklore than history. But to grasp the profound relevance of his warnings for us today, we need to gently set aside that legendary figure and meet the man himself. We need to understand the world that shaped him, a world whose pressures and fractures might feel unexpectedly familiar. His name was Michel de Nostredame, and his primary profession was not that of a seer, but of a physician, a healer. He lived in the heart of France during one of the most violent and spiritually wrenching periods in its history. Imagine, for a moment, what it was to be alive then. The very foundations of reality were cracking. The singular, unifying force of the Catholic Church, which had held Europe together for 1,000 years, was shattering. This was the era of the Protestant Reformation, and it was not a polite theological debate. It was a brutal, all-consuming fire. This was a time when the person living next door to you, someone whose family you'd known for generations, someone you'd shared bread with and whose children played with your own, could suddenly become a mortal enemy. The conflict between the established Catholics and the new Protestant Huguenots was a wound that tore through the very fabric of French society. Cities became battlegrounds. Trust between neighbors evaporated, replaced by a suffocating air of suspicion and religious certainty. It was a world where belief was not a private matter, but a public allegiance, and choosing the wrong side could cost you everything. And as if this human-made turmoil wasn't enough, there was a far older, more terrifying shadow that hung over everything, the ever-present threat of the plague. The Black Death was not a distant memory for Nostradamus. It was a recurring nightmare that had ravaged Europe and could return at any moment. He had seen its work up close. As a physician, he had walked through streets silenced by its passage. He understood how a force of nature so immense and indiscriminate could dissolve the bonds of society overnight, reducing communities to collections of terrified individuals where fear was more contagious than the disease itself. This was the world Nostradamus inhabited daily, a world fractured by the sharp edges of religious conviction, haunted by the specter of disease, and defined by a constant, grinding instability that we can scarcely imagine. So, when we approach his work, let's begin with this fundamental shift in perspective. Nostradamus didn't need a mystical crystal ball to see the future. He just needed to possess the courage to look clearly at his present. He was standing on the fault line of his own great divide. He saw, with the trained eye of a physician, the anatomy of a society consuming itself. He witnessed the precise mechanisms of social collapse. He understood how easily fear, once unleashed, could be manipulated by those in power. He saw how noble ideals and deeply held convictions, when stripped of humility, could curdle into the most rigid and unforgiving forms of hatred. He saw leaders who spoke of unity while sowing division, institutions that were once pillars of stability crumble into dust, and the very concept of a shared, objective truth dissolve in the fires of ideological conflict. He wasn't predicting these things from a void of imagination. He was documenting them. He was living them. And what he chose to record, in his unique and cryptic style, was not a rigid schedule of what specific events would happen 500 years later. He was recording the timeless, repeating pattern of how these things happen, the sequence of symptoms that appear whenever human beings allow fear and division to become their guiding stars. His method for this was, of course, what made him famous: the quatrains. These were short, four-line verses, written in a dense, almost maddeningly obscure mix of Old French, Latin, Greek, and other languages. They are not straightforward sentences. They are poetic riddles, mosaics of symbols, metaphors, and archetypal forces. For centuries, critics have pointed to this vagueness as proof that his work is meaningless, a blank slate onto which anyone can project any meaning they wish. But perhaps that very ambiguity is not a weakness. Perhaps it is the key to its enduring power. He wasn't trying to hand us a photograph of our time. A photograph is literal, specific, and ultimately limited. Instead, he was handing us a mirror whose surface is ancient and imperfect, but one that, if you gaze into it long enough, reflects back the unmistakable contours of the human condition under pressure, regardless of the century. His writings persist because they bypass the specifics of history and speak to the deeper currents that drive it. Think of him less as a fortune teller and more as a brilliant diagnostician of the social soul. A physician learns to recognize the body's patterns. They know that a fever, a cough, and a weakness in the limbs are symptoms pointing to an underlying illness. Nostradamus did the same for society. He looked at the chaos of his time and identified the universal symptoms of a society in the grip of a fever of division. He seemed to understand, with a haunting clarity, that while the names on the flags would change, while the technologies would evolve beyond his wildest dreams, the underlying pathology, the human heart, succumbing to its own worst impulses, would remain tragically, timelessly familiar. Deciphering the symbols, two suns, and the fracturing of truth. So if Nostradamus was holding up a mirror, what are the specific reflections we see in it today? Of all the cryptic images that echo from his quatrains, there is one that seems to rise above the rest in its chilling relevance to our time. It's an image that, at first glance, seems impossible, like something from a dream or a work of science fiction. In his second century of prophecies, in Quatrain 41, he wrote of a time when the clouds would cause two suns to appear in the sky. For centuries, scholars and enthusiasts have debated what this could possibly mean. Was it a prediction of some rare astronomical event, a comet so bright it would rival the sun, a celestial omen? But if we follow our understanding of Nostradamus, not as a literal predictor, but as a master of metaphor, a different and far more unsettling interpretation begins to emerge. What if the sky he was speaking of was not the physical heavens above us, but the sky of human perception, the shared space where we collectively agree upon what is real? And what if the two suns were not celestial bodies, but two separate, competing sources of truth, each one so powerful, so brilliant, that it creates its own complete and self-contained reality. Now, bring that 500-year-old image into the world of 2025. Does it not feel astonishingly familiar? We are living in the age of two suns. Think about it. Two people can now watch the very same event unfold. They can listen to the exact same speech. They can look at the identical set of data. And yet, they can walk away with two completely opposite interpretations, two realities that are not just different, but are mutually exclusive. To one person, a leader is a savior, a beacon of hope. To the other, that same leader is a tyrant, a threat to the nation. To one, a global crisis is an urgent call to action. To the other, that same crisis is an elaborate hoax, a fiction designed to control them. The same sky, but two different suns. The same set of facts, illuminated by two completely different lights. Nostradamus could never have imagined the specific technology that would make this possible. He could not have dreamed of glowing screens in our pockets, of social media feeds, of algorithms that learn our every preference, our every fear. But he didn't need to see the mechanism to understand the result. He seemed to grasp the fundamental principle that once a society loses its single, shared source of light, its common ground of truth, it doesn't descend into darkness, not at first. It fractures into multiple, competing illuminations. Each of these suns has its own powerful gravitational pull. We see it every day. There is the sun of one news network and the sun of another, the sun of one political ideology and the sun of its opposite. Each one pulls its followers into a closed and stable orbit of information. Inside that orbit, everything makes perfect sense. Every news story, every opinion piece, every shared video serves to reinforce the central truth of that solar system. It is a world bathed in the constant, reassuring light of confirmation. Our natural human tendency, what psychologists today call confirmation bias, is not just indulged, it is amplified into the very architecture of our digital lives. We are hardwired to seek out information that validates what we already believe, and the modern world has built a flawless machine to give us exactly that. But the real danger, the true genius of this prophecy, lies in what happens between these two solar systems. The light from one sun cannot penetrate the orbit of the other. To those living under the warm glow of the first sun, the light of the second appears not just as a different opinion, but as a form of madness, as darkness. And to those in the second system, the same is true. The other side is not just mistaken. They are deceived, they are foolish, they are malicious. And this is where simple disagreement escalates into something far more perilous. It becomes a loss of shared humanity. When we no longer share a common sky, we can no longer truly see each other as fellow travelers on the same planet. The other person ceases to be a neighbor with a different viewpoint and becomes an obstacle, an other, an alien inhabitant of a reality we cannot comprehend. Empathy becomes impossible because empathy requires a common ground to stand on. How can you walk a mile in another person's shoes if you don't even agree on what the ground beneath those shoes is made of? This is the true, insidious nature of the Great Divide. It's a quiet severing of the bonds of human connection. It happens so gradually we barely notice it. It's the slow, creeping certainty that we are the ones who are awake and informed, while they are the ones who are asleep and deluded. And perhaps this is the most chilling reflection we find in Nostradamus's mirror. He may have foreseen that the greatest threat to a civilization's future is not a single, all-powerful tyrant who imposes one truth upon everyone. The greater, more subtle danger is a world where everyone can become the absolute tyrant of their own tiny kingdom of truth, a world with a billion suns in a billion different skies, leaving us all brilliantly illuminated and utterly, completely alone. The cracks in the foundation when trust dissolves. This fracturing of reality, this world of two suns, is not just a philosophical problem. It is not an abstract concept to be debated in a university classroom. It has real, tangible consequences that ripple out and touch every aspect of our lives. Because when we no longer share a common sky of truth, something essential begins to dissolve. Something that holds the entire structure of our society together. And that something is trust. Think of trust as the invisible mortar that holds the bricks of civilization in place. It's not something we often see or consciously acknowledge, but without it, the entire edifice becomes unstable. It's the quiet faith that the bridge we're driving over won't collapse. It's the unspoken assumption that the doctor treating us has our best interests at heart. It's the belief, however tenuous at times, that the systems we live under are operating on a shared set of rules and facts. Trust is the currency of a functioning society. And for decades now, study after study, from institutions like the Pew Research Center and others, has been charting the same slow, steady, and alarming decline. The lines on the graphs all point in the same direction: down. Public trust in our core institutions, in government, in the media, in science, in business, has been eroding for a generation. But what the age of two suns has done is accelerate this erosion at an exponential rate. It has poured a solvent on that mortar. Because how can you trust a government when one sun tells you it is a force for good and the other tells you it is a malevolent entity? How can you trust the news when the very word media has become a weapon and every report is immediately filtered through a lens of suspicion, scrutinized not for its facts, but for its perceived agenda? How can we come together to solve great challenges, whether they be economic, environmental, or related to public health, when we cannot even agree on the nature or the existence of the challenge itself? The hoarse cry of "I don't know who to believe anymore" has become the unspoken anthem of our time, and it is an exhausting and deeply unsettling way to live. When trust dissolves on this grand societal scale, the cracks begin to show everywhere. We see them in our politics, where compromise becomes impossible because the other side is not just a political opponent, but an enemy operating in bad faith. We see them in our communities, where what was once a shared sense of civic duty is replaced by a cynical and weary sense of every man for himself. But the most painful cracks appear much closer to home. The erosion of trust doesn't stop at the doors of our institutions. It seeps under our own front doors. It makes us second-guess the motives of our neighbors. It creates a subtle but persistent anxiety in our daily interactions. It plants a seed of doubt that whispers, what is their angle? What reality are they living in? Can I truly trust what they are saying? This is the quiet tragedy unfolding all around us. We are becoming a society of skeptics, not in the healthy philosophical sense of questioning assumptions, but in the weary, isolating sense of being unable to find solid ground to stand on. It creates a profound sense of psychological insecurity. When you can no longer trust the world around you, your own inner world becomes a much more anxious place. The ground feels less stable. The future feels more precarious. Nostradamus, in his quatrains, often wrote of great cities burning and mighty empires crumbling into dust. And for centuries, we have interpreted these as literal predictions of war and destruction. But perhaps we have been looking at the effect and not the cause. Perhaps the true warning was not about the visible flames that consume buildings, but about the invisible fire that precedes it. Maybe he understood a timeless and terrifying truth about human societies. The first fire doesn't erupt in the streets. It begins as a slow, corrosive burn in the hearts of people at the precise moment they stop being able to trust one another. When that inner trust is gone, when the mortar has turned to dust, the walls are already destined to fall. It is only a matter of time. What we've just explored together, these feelings of division, this fracturing of truth, this erosion of trust. These are not simple problems, and there are certainly no easy answers. To pretend otherwise would be dishonest. But the first step toward healing any wound is to acknowledge that it exists, to describe it without blame, and to understand its nature. And the first step toward bridging any divide is to begin a conversation. Not a debate, where the goal is to win, but a true conversation, where the goal is to understand. And so, I want to invite you to do just that. This space below is not meant for arguments or accusations. Let's make it a place for shared reflection. I truly want to hear from your experience. In your own life, in your own family or community, how does this great divide make itself known to you? And more importantly, perhaps, instead of only focusing on what's breaking apart, where do you see things being held together? Where have you found a bridge of understanding or witnessed a moment of connection that defied the odds? Those stories matter. They are a source of light and a source of hope for all of us. So please, take a moment to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let this be a space where we can listen to one another. And if this conversation feels valuable to you, if it resonates, I hope you'll subscribe and join us as we continue this journey. Because in our next part, we will turn from diagnosing the problem to exploring the remedy, the search for strength in a world that demands it. The Sanctuary Within, a prayer for strength in turbulent times. Welcome back. In the first part of our journey, we stood together and looked into the mirror that Nostradamus held up to our modern age. We saw the cracks of division, the disorienting shadow of two suns, and the erosion of the trust that once held us together. To sit with those truths is to feel a certain weight, and if you felt a sense of helplessness, know that this is a perfectly natural response. But the story of humanity has never just been a story of its moments of collapse. It is also, and more importantly, a story of its resilience. So the question we must now ask is, where does that strength come from? When the world outside feels unstable, where do we find our solid ground? That strength is rarely found in the noise of the world. It comes from a deeper place. It rises from a quiet wellspring that exists inside each of us. The prayer for strength that we are here to explore is the simple, profound act of finding our way back to that inner source, clearing away the debris, and learning to draw from it once again. The universal act of seeking strength, what we mean by prayer. Now, before we go any further on this path, I think it's important, truly essential, that we pause and get clear on what we mean by that word, prayer. For many people, that word is deeply meaningful, but it can also be a loaded one. It can carry with it the weight of specific traditions, of rituals, of doctrines, and for others, it may carry no weight at all. So, for the purpose of our conversation today, I want to invite you to gently set aside any preconceived notions you may have about that word. What we are exploring here is not tied to any single religion, creed, or dogma. It is something far more universal. It is a fundamental human act, a practice that has appeared in countless forms across every culture and every age of history. What we are talking about when we say a prayer for strength is not the act of reciting words written by someone else in the hope of receiving an external intervention. It is something more active, more intentional. It is the simple, powerful act of recalibrating your inner compass. Imagine you are a traveler on a long and difficult journey. The landscape is confusing, the maps are old, and the sky is overcast, hiding the sun and the stars. You feel lost. To simply keep walking in a random direction would be foolish. The wisest thing you could do is to stop, to find a quiet place, pull out the compass you carry with you, and wait for the needle to settle. You wait for it to stop trembling, to stop reacting to the magnetic interference around you, and to finally point you back to your own true north. This is what we mean by prayer. It is the act of stopping, of intentionally stepping out of the noise and the rush, of quieting the outer world so that you can hear the inner one. It is the moment you take to let the needle of your own spirit settle. Think of it in other ways. For a musician, before playing a complex and beautiful piece of music, the first and most crucial step is to tune their instrument. They don't just launch into the performance. They take a quiet moment to listen, to adjust, to bring each string into its proper harmony. This prayer, this act of seeking strength, is the process of tuning the instrument of your own being. It's about creating inner harmony before you attempt to play in the chaotic orchestra of the world. Or, imagine a ship on a storm-tossed sea. The waves are crashing over the deck, the winds are howling, and the surface is pure chaos. But the experienced captain knows that just a few dozen feet below that violent surface, the waters of the deep ocean are calm, silent, and undisturbed. The act of prayer is the act of dropping anchor. It's the conscious decision to lower a part of your awareness down through the turbulent surface of your daily thoughts and emotions, and to anchor it in that deep, quiet, resilient place within you that is untouched by the storm. This is a universal human practice. In the Buddhist tradition, it may be called meditation, the practice of observing the mind until it becomes still. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome called it contemplation, a time to reflect on what is and is not within our control. For some, this act takes the form of writing in a journal, a way of untangling the knots of thought and feeling onto the page. For others, it's found in the simple act of walking in nature, of letting the rhythm of their footsteps and the silence of the trees bring them back to themselves. It doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter if you do it in a church, in a forest, on a meditation cushion, or in a quiet chair in your living room before the sun comes up. The form is secondary. The intention is everything. So, as we move forward together into this practice, let's agree on this. Whether you call it prayer, or meditation, or reflection, or simply a quiet moment to yourself, its essence is one and the same. It is a deliberate, conscious act of turning inward to find the strength that the outward world cannot provide. It is the way we find our way back to the wellspring. The first invocation, a prayer for clarity. So, let us begin. With this shared understanding of what it means to seek strength, we can now turn to the first invocation, the first step in drawing from that inner wellspring. If we consider that the Great Divide, as we explored in our first part, is fueled by confusion, by the fracturing of reality, and by the emotional chaos of living under two suns, then it stands to reason that the very first antidote we must seek, the first quality we must cultivate, is its direct opposite, and that is clarity. Before we can act wisely, before we can speak truthfully, before we can connect authentically, we must first learn to see clearly. Not with our physical eyes, but with the eye of the mind, the eye of the heart. The world we live in today is a blizzard of information and emotion. Every moment, we are bombarded with breaking news, with urgent opinions, with algorithmically chosen content designed to provoke a reaction to make us feel angry or afraid or self-righteous. It is a constant storm of stimulation, and trying to navigate this storm without a clear mind is like trying to sail a ship without a rudder. We are simply tossed about by the waves, reacting to one thing after another, losing our own direction in the process. A prayer for clarity, then, is a prayer for stillness. It is the conscious act of allowing the muddy waters of the mind to settle, so that we can once again see the bottom. It's the quiet request for the wisdom to tell the difference between the signal and the noise. So what does this prayer, this inner invocation, actually look like? It is not one single phrase, but a series of gentle intentions we can hold in our hearts and minds. It can begin with a simple, quiet affirmation, spoken only to yourself. You might begin with this: may I have the strength to distinguish the signal from the noise. Think about what this means. The noise is everything that is designed to distract and divide us. It is the outrage of the hour, the endless scroll of opinions, the sensational headlines. The signal, on the other hand, is what is real, what is essential, what is true. It is the underlying humanity of a situation, the quiet facts beneath the loud commentary, the deeper needs and fears that drive people's behavior. This prayer is an appeal for the discernment to focus on what truly matters. From there, the prayer can deepen. May I have the awareness to recognize when my emotions are being manipulated. This is a profoundly important act of self-possession. The modern information environment, what some have called the attention economy, is not designed to inform us. It is designed to capture and hold our attention. And the easiest way to do that is to trigger our most primal emotions, fear and anger. When we feel that sudden hot surge of indignation or that cold knot of anxiety from something we've just seen or read, this prayer is a gentle reminder to pause, to take a breath, and to ask a simple question: is this feeling truly mine, or has it been intentionally sparked in me by someone who benefits from my agitation? This simple question is an act of reclaiming your own emotional sovereignty. The prayer then turns from our inner world to our outer interactions. May I have the patience to pause before I judge, to listen before I react. In a world that demands instant responses, a quick comment, a like, a share, the most radical act can be the choice to do nothing at all, to simply wait. This is a prayer for the inner space needed to absorb information without immediately having to form an opinion about it. It is the request for the grace to truly hear what another person is saying, especially when we disagree, rather than just formulating our rebuttal while they are still speaking. It is the strength to resist the intoxicating rush of being right, in favor of the more difficult but infinitely more rewarding path of understanding. And finally, this prayer for clarity must end with a dose of profound humility. May I have the wisdom to remember that my perspective is not the entire picture. To live under one sun, no matter how bright it seems, is to only see one side of the mountain. This final intention is the antidote to the certainty that hardens our hearts. It is the gentle, ongoing reminder that the map is not the territory, that our beliefs about the world are not the world itself. It is the quiet acknowledgement that there are truths and experiences that exist outside of our own, and that true wisdom begins not with what we know, but with the honest recognition of all that we do not. This, then, is the prayer for clarity. It is not a passive wish. It is an active training of the mind. It is a quiet rebellion against the forces of chaos and confusion. It is the first and most essential step in taking back our own peace, in finding our own solid ground, so that when we do choose to step back into the world, we do so not as a reactor, but as a conscious, clear-eyed, and centered human being. The second invocation, a prayer for courage. Once we have taken the time to let the waters of our mind settle, once we have prayed for and practiced the art of seeing the world with greater clarity, a new question naturally arises: what do we do now? Because clarity without action is just passive observation. It is like a traveler who, after consulting his compass and finding his true direction, simply stays put and admires the needle. It is an important first step, but it is not the journey itself. To see the right path is one thing, to walk it is another entirely. And to walk a path of integrity in a world that is pulling in so many different directions, that requires the second quality we must seek from our inner wellspring, and that is courage. Now, the word courage often brings to mind grand, dramatic images. We think of the soldier on the battlefield, the firefighter running into a burning building, the activist speaking truth to power before a massive crowd. This is the loud, visible, and undeniably important courage that shapes headlines and changes the course of history. We rightfully admire it, but for most of us, in our daily lives, the call to courage is much quieter. It is more subtle. It is an inner strength that is tested not in one heroic moment, but in 100 small, seemingly insignificant choices we make every single day. This is the quiet courage that is so desperately needed to heal the Great Divide. It is the courage not to conquer the world, but to govern ourselves. So, what does a prayer for this quiet courage look like? It is an invocation for the strength to live in alignment with the clarity we have found, framed as a series of inner intentions. It begins with a prayer for the courage of restraint. In a quiet moment, you might hold this intention. May I find the strength today to refuse to be a carrier of anger. This is the prayer to not share that article, that meme, that post that you know is designed to inflame hatred or mock the other side. It's a prayer for the strength to resist the momentary satisfying rush of tribal victory it might give you. In a world that rewards outrage with attention, this quiet intention to simply let a toxic piece of information die with you is a powerful and deeply principled act. Next, it is a prayer for the courage of humility. The intention could be, "May I have the integrity to embrace what I do not know." This is the prayer for the strength to say those 7 simple but increasingly difficult words. "I don't know enough to have an opinion." In a culture that pressures everyone to have an instant, passionate take on every complex issue, this prayer is an act of resistance. It is the integrity to choose honest uncertainty over a false and borrowed certainty, and the courage to resist being drawn into a conflict you don't fully understand. Then, we can pray for the courage of openness. This one is perhaps the most challenging of all. The prayer might be, "May I have the courage to listen for understanding, not for victory." This is the intention to truly hear a perspective that is opposed to your own. Not just to be silent while the other person talks, not just to wait for your turn to counter their points, but to listen with a genuine curiosity. It's a prayer to have the strength to temporarily suspend your own reality, to lower your defenses, and to honor the humanity of the person in front of you, even and especially when you disagree with their ideas. And finally, we must pray for the most humbling courage of all. The intention is simple and direct. May I have the strength to be wrong. This is the prayer for the grace to say, "I was wrong," to sincerely apologize. In a polarized world, changing your mind is often portrayed as a betrayal, a weakness. We are encouraged to double down, to never give an inch. But this prayer, this quiet request for the strength to admit a mistake and acknowledge a flaw in our own reasoning, is the very thing that allows for growth and reconciliation. It is the act that breaks the cycle of blame and creates the possibility of a new beginning. These prayers for quiet courage don't make the evening news. They won't win you any awards. In fact, sometimes their only witness will be you. But do not be mistaken, they are not small things. These are the threads from which a new social fabric can be woven. They are the individual, microscopic acts of integrity that, when practiced by millions of people in their daily lives, accumulate into a force more powerful than any army. This is the courage that is asked of us now. Not necessarily to change the whole world at once, but to bravely, quietly, and consistently change our own corner of it by the way we choose to show up every single day. The third invocation, a prayer for compassion. We have prayed for clarity, to see the world and ourselves without illusion. We have prayed for courage, to act with integrity in the face of pressure. But now we arrive at the heart of the matter. We come to the quality that is, at once, the most difficult to cultivate and the most powerful medicine for the sickness of our time. It is the one force capable of truly healing the Great Divide, We now turn to the third invocation, a prayer for compassion. In our modern world, the word compassion is often misunderstood. We sometimes mistake it for pity or for a kind of soft, sentimental weakness. We might see it as an endorsement of another person's behavior, a sign that we agree with them. But true compassion is none of these things. True compassion is a form of strength. It is a profound courage of the heart. If the very architecture of the Great Divide is built upon the foundation of us versus them, if it is fueled by the constant labeling and dehumanizing of the other side, then compassion is the quiet, deliberate act of demolishing that foundation. It is the radical insistence on a simple, revolutionary truth. There is no other side. There is only us, all of us. This is where the real work begins. Because it is easy to feel compassion for those who are like us, for those who agree with us, for those who are suffering in ways we understand. But what about the others? The question inevitably arises in any honest heart, and it is a fair one. How can I possibly feel compassion for someone whose beliefs I find dangerous? For someone whose words and actions seem to be harming the world I care about? It feels like a betrayal of our own values to extend compassion to those we stand against. Here, we must make a crucial distinction. Compassion is not agreement. It is not approval. It is not condoning harmful actions or abandoning your own deeply held principles. Compassion is the ability to look at another human being, even in the midst of your profound disagreement, and to recognize the person behind the ideology. It is the willingness to acknowledge that behind their labels, their arguments, and their anger, there is a human being. A person who, just like you, has fears. A person who, just like you, has hopes for their children. A person who, just like you, has known pain and disappointment. A person who is, in their own way, trying to make sense of a confusing and often frightening world. Compassion is the capacity to hold two seemingly contradictory thoughts in your mind at the same time. I fundamentally disagree with what you are saying and doing, and I can still see and honor the humanity within you. This is not weakness. This is a sign of immense spiritual and emotional maturity. So, a prayer for compassion is perhaps the most challenging prayer of all. It asks us to stretch our hearts beyond their comfortable boundaries. It can begin with a simple intention: may I have the grace to see the person behind the label. This is a prayer to look past the political party, the online avatar, the angry comment, and to remember the complex, flawed, and sacred human being on the other side. It is an act of remembering that no one is defined solely by their worst opinion or their most frustrating belief. Then, the prayer moves into our own emotional world. When I feel the fire of anger rising within me, may I have the strength to look for the fear or the pain that lies beneath it, both in myself and in the other person. Anger is almost always a secondary emotion. It is a protective shield we raise to cover something more vulnerable. Often, beneath our anger is a deep fear, a fear of losing something we value, a fear of the future, a fear of being powerless. And very often, the same is true for the person who is making us angry. Their anger is likely a shield for their own fear. This prayer is an invocation for the wisdom to look beneath the surface of the conflict, to seek the common ground of our shared human vulnerabilities. And finally, the prayer for compassion is a commitment to our own hearts. May I have the strength to keep my heart open, even when my mind wants to slam it shut. Our minds are built for judgment. They are designed to categorize, to analyze, to label, to be right. And when faced with a threat, the mind's first instinct is to build a wall, to close down, to protect itself. This prayer is the courageous act of overriding that instinct. It is the conscious choice to say, I will not let this disagreement turn my heart to stone. I will not allow this conflict to sever my connection to our shared humanity. This is the work. It is not easy. There will be days when it feels impossible, But this is the only work that can truly begin to heal the divide. Clarity allows us to see the problem. Courage allows us to stand our ground with integrity. But it is only compassion that can build a bridge across the chasm. It is the only force that can turn an enemy into a neighbor and a stranger into a brother or a sister once again. The final invocation, a prayer for resilience. We have now arrived at the final invocation in our search for inner strength. We have sought clarity to see the world as it island. We have sought courage to act with integrity, and we have sought compassion to keep our hearts open. But anyone who has ever tried to live this way, even for a single day, knows that this work is not easy. It is demanding, and it can be deeply tiring. The work of healing the world and of healing ourselves is not a sprint, it is a marathon. It is a long, slow, and often winding path. There will be days when our clarity feels clouded. There will be moments when our courage fails us. There will be times when our well of compassion feels completely dry. There will be days when we look at the state of the world and feel a profound sense of exhaustion, a weariness that makes us question if any of it is worth the effort. And that is why the final quality we must pray for, the final strength we must draw from our inner wellspring, is the one that will sustain us for the journey. We must now pray for resilience. Resilience is often misunderstood. We sometimes think of it as being tough, like a stone wall that can withstand any blow without changing. But that is not true resilience. A stone wall, under enough pressure, will eventually crack and crumble. True resilience is not rigid, it is flexible, it is alive. Think, instead, of a great oak tree. A resilient oak tree is not one that stands perfectly still in a storm. It is one that has the suppleness to bend with the fierce winds, to let them pass through its branches without breaking. But at the same time, it has roots that run deep into the earth, holding it fast. Resilience is this combination of flexibility on the surface and deep, unwavering strength at the core. It is the ability to be tossed by the storms of life and yet not be uprooted. So, a prayer for resilience is a prayer for this deep, flexible, and enduring strength. It is a practical prayer for the long haul. It begins with gentleness toward ourselves. May I have the grace to forgive myself when I fall short. We are not perfect. We will make mistakes. We will lose our tempers. We will say things we regret. We will fail to live up to our own highest ideals. In those moments, the temptation is to fall into shame or cynicism. A prayer for resilience is the quiet strength to say, yes, I failed in that moment, but I can begin again, right now. It is the compassion we have cultivated for others, turned back upon ourselves. Next, it is a prayer for replenishment. May I have the wisdom to find beauty and joy in the small moments of daily life, so they may refuel my spirit. No one can live on a constant diet of conflict and crisis. It will burn us out. Resilience is the wisdom to know that we must consciously seek out what nourishes us. It is the practice of finding replenishment not in some grand vacation, but in the here and now. It is the joy of a shared meal with a loved one, the quiet beauty of a sunset, the comfort of a good book, the sound of laughter. These are not distractions from the important work. They are the important work. They are how we refill the wellspring so that we have something to give tomorrow. And finally, it is a prayer for balance. May I have the wisdom to know when to push forward and when to rest. A resilient life is not lived at a constant, frantic pace. It has a rhythm. There is a time for engagement and a time for retreat, a time for speaking out and a time for quiet listening. This prayer is for the inner attunement to know what is needed in any given moment. It is the strength to say no when we are depleted and the courage to say yes when we are called to act. It is the wisdom to honor the natural cycles of effort and recovery, knowing that it is in the quiet moments of rest that our deepest strength is truly restored. Nostradamus warned of the Great Divide 2025 prayer for strength. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. Sun Tzu. What if Nostradamus's warnings weren't just visions of global disaster, but quiet signals pointing to the emotional and spiritual fractures we're living through right now? Because here in 2025, there's a tension that hums quietly beneath our everyday lives. It's not always loud, it doesn't come with sirens or headlines, but you can feel it in the strained silence between loved ones, in the rising pressure of simple conversations, and in the growing sense that we're no longer seeing the world through the same lens. This is the Great Divide. And perhaps, as Nostradamus saw it, it wasn't just a political or global rift, but a deeply personal one. A spiritual divide. A disconnect not just between people, but between people and their own sense of peace. At the Journey of Wisdom, we believe that in times like these, what we need most isn't more fear, but more stillness, more strength. That's where the second part of our journey begins, the prayer for strength. Now, this isn't a plea born from weakness. It is a conscious, deliberate act of fortitude. It is the decision to seek out our own center, our own quiet, unshakable ground, when the world outside feels chaotic and uncertain. It's about finding the inner resilience needed not just to endure these times, but to navigate them with clarity and perhaps even with grace. The Way Forward, Lessons for a World at a Crossroads. Welcome to the final part of our journey together. In our beginning, we stood before the mirror of history, and we saw our own time reflected in its ancient surface, a time of division and dissolving trust. In response, we then turned inward. We took a step back from the noise and sought the sanctuary within, the deep wellspring of our own inner strength. We learned to pray for clarity, for courage, for compassion, and for the resilience to walk this path with grace. But a sanctuary, no matter how peaceful or restorative, is not meant to be a permanent hiding place. It is not a fortress where we lock ourselves away from the world. It is a garden where we go to tend to our own spirit, a workshop where we repair and strengthen our own hearts. It is a place we visit so that we can re-enter the world not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. And so, we arrive at the most vital and hopeful question of all: now what? How do we carry the peace of that inner sanctuary out into a world that feels anything but peaceful? How do these quiet, internal shifts we've cultivated, these prayers and intentions, actually make a difference in the face of such large and overwhelming challenges? How can a change within one person possibly create a meaningful ripple in the vast ocean of our society? This is what we are here to explore today, because every action that is born from a centered and compassionate heart, no matter how small or quiet it may seem, is like a pebble dropped into a still lake. We may not be able to predict the exact path of the ripples. We may not see where they will eventually touch the distant shore, but we can know with absolute certainty that we have set something in motion. The Quiet Revolution, redefining how the world is changed. One of the greatest sources of our modern anxiety is the feeling that the world's problems are just too big. We watch the news, we see the scale of the division, the anger, the complexity, and it's easy to feel utterly powerless. We feel like a single drop of rain trying to change the direction of a raging river. Many of us carry a quiet sense of guilt or frustration, believing we should be doing more to fix things, but having no idea where to even start. But perhaps the feeling of being overwhelmed comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world is truly changed. We have been taught to look for change in the headlines, in the grand gestures, in the actions of presidents and parliaments. We have been conditioned to believe that changing the world is loud, dramatic, and performed on a massive stage. I'd like to propose a different idea. The most powerful, most lasting, and most meaningful changes do not start on that grand stage. They begin in the quietest and most intimate spaces of our lives. They are part of a quiet revolution. This revolution isn't fought with armies or ballots, though those things have their place. It is fought with presence and with patience. Its primary battlefield isn't the capital city, it's the family dinner table. Its progress isn't measured in the number of people marching in the streets, but in the number of fractured conversations that are gently guided back toward understanding. Its greatest weapon is not a protest sign, but the simple, courageous act of deep listening. Think of society as having a fractal nature. A fractal is a pattern that repeats itself at every scale, from the infinitely large to the infinitesimally small. A healthy, coherent society is much the same. It is built upon the foundation of healthy, coherent communities. Those communities, in turn, are built from healthy, coherent families and friendships. And those relationships are built, one conversation at a time, by healthy, coherent individuals. The change always begins at the smallest level. It begins with you. When we feel overwhelmed by the state of the world, it's often because we are trying to fix the system from the top down, a task for which we are not equipped. The quiet revolution invites us to work from the bottom up. It relieves us of the impossible burden of saving the world and gives us a tangible, achievable, and profoundly meaningful mission to bring health and healing to our own small corner of it. You want to heal the division in the country? Start by healing the division with your brother-in-law who voted differently than you did. You want to bring more truth into the world? Start by speaking your own truth with more kindness and listening to others with less judgment. This is not a small or insignificant act. This is not a retreat from the world's problems. It is the most direct and foundational way of engaging with them. It is the work of tending to the soil in which a healthier world can one day grow. It is where our power truly lies. The most radical act, the power of true presence. So, if our work is to heal the world from the inside out, starting in our own lives, what does that work actually look like? What is the one practice, the one central action that brings all of our inner work, our clarity, our courage, our compassion into the world? The answer is surprisingly simple, yet it may be the most difficult and radical act any of us can perform in our modern age. It is the practice of offering another human being the gift of our true, undivided presence. How do we practice the compassion we prayed for? We practice it by being present. How do we enact the quiet courage to listen to a different viewpoint? We do it by being present. In a world that is addicted to distraction, a world that constantly pulls our attention in 1,000 different directions at once, the choice to be fully present with one person, right here, right now, is a revolutionary act. True presence is not simply being in the same room with someone. It is not waiting quietly for your turn to speak, formulating your counter-argument in your head while they are still talking. It is not nodding along while your mind is actually scrolling through your worries or your to-do list. True presence is a form of surrender. It is the willingness to temporarily set aside your own story, your own agenda, your own need to be right, in order to create a safe and empty space for another person's reality to unfold. It is the choice to listen not just to the words being spoken, but to the feelings beneath the words. It's the art of hearing what is not being said, the hint of fear behind the angry statement, the trace of pain behind the cynical remark, the deep human need for safety or respect that is driving the entire conversation. Imagine a master mechanic, an old-timer who can fix any engine. When a complex, sputtering machine is brought to her, she doesn't just start banging on it with a wrench. First, she simply stands beside it. She closes her eyes and she listens. She listens to the rhythm, to the clatter, to the subtle whine, to the silence between the sounds. She lets the machine itself tell her where it is broken. We must learn to listen to each other in this way. When you are in a conversation and you make the conscious choice to put your phone away, truly away, and you turn your body toward the other person, and you look into their eyes, and you listen with the sole intention of understanding, you are doing more than just being polite. You are creating a tiny island of sanity in an ocean of chaos. You are making a powerful, unspoken declaration that says, right now, this connection between us is more important than all the division in the world. This is how we begin to mend the tears in our social fabric, one conversation at a time. This single act of presence is the pebble we drop in the lake. It is the foundation of the quiet revolution. And it is a power that is available to every single one of us at any given moment. The final lesson: what the Great Divide reveals about us. As we draw near to the end of our journey, there is one final question that hangs in the air. Why? Why is this happening now? Is this Great Divide simply a random, tragic accident of history? Or is there, perhaps, a deeper meaning to be found in the heart of this turmoil? Maybe the true warning from Nostradamus and from the echoes we see in our own time was never about the end of the world. Perhaps it was about the necessary end of a certain way of living in the world. Perhaps it was about the end of living unconsciously. For the last few decades, we have been living through the greatest paradox in human history. We have become the most connected society that has ever existed, and yet we have never been more lonely. We have thousands of friends on a screen, but often not a single person we feel we can truly talk to. We have access to the entirety of human knowledge in our pocket, yet we have never been more confused about what is true. We can see images from across the globe in an instant, but we have never felt more disconnected from the people living right next door. The Great Divide, in all its painful forms, is not the disease itself. It is the symptom. It is the outward manifestation of this profound inner contradiction. It is the fever that signals a deeper illness, a soul sickness born of superficial connection and a desperate, unmet hunger for something real. And like any serious illness, it forces us to stop. It forces us to pay attention. It forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about what it means to be healthy. This crisis, this time of fracturing and confusion, is not here simply to destroy us. It is here to awaken us. It is a collective initiation. It is holding a mirror up to our civilization and forcing us to confront the most fundamental questions. It is forcing us to ask, what does it truly mean to be connected to another human being? What is the real value of truth in a world of infinite information? What is the hidden strength in compassion in a culture that so often rewards cynicism? And ultimately, what does it mean to be a human being right now in this pivotal moment of our shared story? These are not easy questions, but for the first time in a long time, we are being forced, as a collective, to truly ask them. The old ways of living on autopilot, of taking our connections and our shared reality for granted, are no longer working. The ground has become too unstable, and so we are being called to choose, not to choose a political party or an ideology or a side in a culture war. We are being called to make a much deeper choice, a conscious choice, to choose presence over distraction, to choose understanding over judgment, to choose connection over division. This is the final, profound lesson hidden within the heart of the Great Divide. It is a painful, demanding, and ultimately necessary invitation to finally, consciously, grow up as a species. And so, our long journey together comes to its end. We began by gazing into the ancient mirror Nostradamus held up, and in its reflection, we recognized the familiar landscape of our own divided time. From that place of sober recognition, we turned inward. We sought the quiet sanctuary of the heart to find the wellspring of strength, the clarity, the courage, the compassion, and the resilience needed for the road ahead. And today, we have found the simple, quiet path to carry that inner peace back out into the world, not through grand gestures, but through the profound power of human presence. In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson is this: the prophecy is not a sentence. The warnings are not a cage of destiny. The future is not a story that has already been written. They are, all of them, simply an invitation. An invitation to choose differently, right here, right now. An invitation to choose understanding over judgment, to choose connection over division, and in the quiet, ordinary moments of our daily lives, to choose hope over fear. This journey through 3 parts has been a long one, and at times, I know it has not been an easy one. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting the number "I am still here" below, so that I know I have had fellow travelers with me for this entire journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement and a beautiful end to the conversation we have shared together. Thank you for listening.